Hi, I'm Tom Vladeck, co-founder and co-CEO of Recast, the world's most advanced media mix modeling platform, and it's where the world's best brands measure and optimize their marketing spend. Today we've got episode 3 of my Chalk Talks. I'm going to talk about time varying covariates, parameter recovery, but the main topic I'm going to be covering is the impact of using lift tests to calibrate your MMM, why they can be so powerful and beneficial. I'm going to walk you through a pretty in-depth example of how it works on Recast platform. If you follow my videos, a couple weeks ago, I said that MMMs and lift tests go together like peanut butter and jelly. They are really complementary because MMMs can recommend which channels you should test, the ones that are most important in terms of driving your business outcomes. Lift tests can also be used as information to the MMM itself and make the MMM overall more accurate, even in channels that you don't test. I'm going to show you exactly how that works as I go through this example today. All right, I hope you're ready to dig into some code today because I'm going to go through it step by step, make it super explainable every moment along the way. I've got RStudio open here, and I've got two files. One is a file that walks through all of the analysis, and one that has a very simple model in Stan that illustrates a lot of the concepts I'll be discussing and is similar in concept to the MMM that Recast uses. Let's get started. I have some libraries I need. I'm going to be estimating things in command Stan. I'm going to be manipulating data in dplyr. And this last one's scoring rules. We're going to talk at the end why that's important, but this is going to be used to estimate the precision of the MMMs, both with and without lift tests included. The first thing I'm going to do is simulate some data. This is super important always when you're testing model structure, the impacts of new things on your model. You always got to simulate data and see whether or not what you are going to include in the model, in this case, lift test calibration, is actually going to work. The only way that you know it works is with data that you've simulated, because only in the case of data that you've simulated do you actually know the true parameters that drove the model. So I have this thing called a kernel. What's a kernel? A kernel is a covariance matrix. In this case, it's the Cholesky decomposed covariance matrix. But this shows what I'm doing here, and you don't need to know the specifics, is I'm generating data via a Gaussian process. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of how Gaussian processes work, but they're ways of generating realistic time series data. Our Gaussian process has is that today is like yesterday, which means the data we generate is going to be smooth, right? One day following the next, they're going to be close. So when you draw a line through all the points, it looks like a smoothly varying line. And the other assumption is that today is like a year ago, meaning that if there is a seasonal pattern in the data, this Gaussian process should be able to fit it. The way to generate data from a kernel like this is just to matrix multiply it by a standard normal distribution. So the way to generate data from the Cholesky decomposed kernel like this is just to multiply it by a standard normal distribution, and that will give you simulation draws from the Gaussian process. So that's what's happening here. I've got this kernel, matrix multiplying it by a matrix of normally distributed random variables, and then what comes out the other end are these draws from our time series, right? And you can see they follow like a smoothly varying pattern. So I'm going to use this general structure to generate time varying ROIs. And so what I've got here is a hard lower bound of 0, a hard upper bound of 5. I'm doing it for 3 channels. These control the mean and skew of the distribution, because I'll explain what that means in a second. Of standard normal random variables, here I'm going to generate some overall means. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my time varying coefficients, scale them by some factor s, which makes them a little bit tighter. I'm going to add an overall mean to them, and then a channel specific mean, and then push them through an inverse logit distribution to bound them by the caps. Once I've done all that, I get some ROIs that look like this. So this S is sort of dampening the movement. The mean is pushing them towards the bottom of the distribution so that they're a little bit closer to 0 than to 5. And then this is bounding it within that range. And I still get this smoothly varying over time pathway of the ROIs. These are some sort of realistic ROIs. I've generated this path of ROIs, and I can plot them. They look pretty reasonable. The other thing is that I need to simulate spend. Here I take a random walk, the cumulative sum of normally distributed random variables calibrated to make it look reasonable. I can simulate spend that looks like this, right? And this actually works out to a fairly reasonable image of what spend might look like for a growing brand. And then to get the impacts at the channel level, I multiply the ROIs by the spend. I can plot these as well. I get one channel that's really dominating and two channels that are much lower, and one channel that seems to be not performing very well at all. Finally, to get the outcome, I take the row sums of the impacts and then add some noise to it. I can get the outcome. This looks like a nicely growing brand, maybe with a little bit of a seasonal pattern. Overall, the shareholders of this business and people that work there would be very happy, growing quite a bit in the past couple of years. Cool. So now I've simulated data. So what do I have? I've spend and I have an outcome. That's what we'll send into the model. And then I have these ROIs, or these impacts, that I care about estimating. Let's talk about how we do that in the model. This is Stan for those of you that haven't played around with a platform like Stan or PyMC. Don't worry too much about it. I'm just going to walk through how this model is structured, because it's basically structured the exact same way as I've generated the data, just with a few more pieces to it. So you've got to tell it the dimensions of the data, right? So I've got time steps channels, lift tests will come to this. I'm passing in the same kernel that I used to generate the time varying data. I've got my outcome Y, I've got my predictors spend, which could be called X. I've got a prior on how much error there's going to be. I've got my priors on the ROIs, the upper bounds, the lower bounds, the means, the scales. I'm going to be passing through the lift tests. So this is going to tell you sort of which channel, when did the lift test start, when did it stop, what did we measure as the result during that lift test, and what was the standard error of that estimate. Finally, I'm going to be running this model only generating from the prior to show you what the prior looks like, meaning like if we don't actually estimate the model, we just test the model's assumptions, what does that imply? Very important to do when you're building a model this complex. Finally, what are we going to be estimating? We're going to be estimating the ROI, the mean ROI, the ROI over time, the impacts, the predictions, the error, and then I'm going to have a penalty for violating the lift test values. And I'll walk through how this works. For every step in the model, we're going to be generating the ROIs. And how do we do that? Well, this line here should look pretty much exactly the same as this line here, right? So we've got an inverse logit function, a lower bound and upper bound. We're multiplying by a kernel. We have some overall mean within this inverse logit that we think is true for all channels. We've got a channel specific mean, and that should be exactly the same in here, right? And so we're estimating what I'm calling eta ROI, and eta ROI are just these latent parameters, and that's the same as here, right? Every time I generate this random data, I can get a path of ROIs here. And so really when you sort of drill down, what you're trying to estimate are these etas. And that's what's here. If you can generate or estimate these, you can generate ROIs. If you can generate ROIs, you can generate impacts. If you can generate impacts, you can generate predictions. If you can generate predictions, you can get errors. And so that's the chain. Really, the only thing that we're estimating here are the ROIs, and then that flows through all the way to these errors. The errors are what we're trying to minimize in a Bayesian way, but that's how you get the prediction errors in the model. In the model itself, what we're basically saying is we think that the errors are going to be normally distributed with some standard deviation sigma. We think that this sigma is going to be exponentially distributed by the reciprocal of the error scale that we pass in. The ROI means, the sort of channel specific means, are going to be standard normal. The eta ROIs are going to be standard normal. And these are the things that generate the actual data, the ROIs that we care about. And then we'll talk about the lift test penalty in a minute. So this is how the model works. And what's happening is that the model is sampling values for these values for the ROI means, the eta ROIs, the sigma, the errors, and then it's passing it through this set of functions to generate predictions. What it's going to try to do is it's going to try to find the ROI means and eta ROIs that minimize the overall penalty on the model If these errors are really wide, that's going to be a huge likelihood penalty. And so it's going to incentivize the model, in a sense, to find these ADA ROIs and these ROI means that do a better job of minimizing the errors, but that also correspond to the priors that we've specified. So what I'm going to do here is tell command stand to compile the model. I specify the data, and this is going to be a prior only run with no lift tests. I just want to show you what this looks like. I could hit model sample and do all this. It does take a little bit of time. For the sake of efficiency, I've already estimated it. I've saved it in this RDS file. Luckily, I already have it in memory, so I don't have to do anything. What I'm going to do is plot what the ROIs look like when I simulate from the prior. Takes a moment. And you can see this is a bunch of draws from the prior. These are basically the same thing as if I had just plotted a bunch of these. When I did this, I plotted 10. If I plotted 100, it would look like that. If I plotted 1,000, it'll take even more time. Now, the reason this looks slightly different than the image that I've showed you is because I haven't pushed this through the inverse logit function, added the mean, etc., but you get the same idea, right? So what this is saying is that our assumptions before we look at the data are that the ROIs for channel 1 are going to look like this, potentially, right? So they're sort of weighted more towards the bottom end of the scale. They might go as high as 5, but we think that's unlikely. We can do this for channel 2 as well, right? And it's going to look pretty much exactly the same, right? This model doesn't know anything about channel 1 or channel 2, how much you've spent, what the outcome looks like. It's just playing with the assumptions. I've now fit a model just with the prior only, right? So prior only is 1 with lift tests included. Just to reset the stage, I'm plotting the ROI curves as they look with the no lift test version. And now I'm going to do the grand reveal without showing the model the predictions of the error, anything like that. What do the lift tests do to the model? When this plot renders, what you will see is a bow tie shape. And the knots in the middle are where the lift tests are. We've gone from a world where all we know are our assumptions to now we've run 2 lift tests. We can see that during the period of the lift test, which I'm actually going to annotate here, I'm going to bracket them with vertical lines at the time steps where the lift test took place and horizontal lines showing the range of plausible values that the lift test came up with. We can see that the model, what we're in a sense doing is we're pinning the model to those lift test estimates. Now, between the lift tests, the model can be more flexible, but not infinitely so. I want to zoom in on the axes to show what that model learned in addition to the lift test. Before we included the lift tests, we have ROI values sort of above 3 and below 0.5 at the high end and the low end. But with the lift tests, even though we've only included across 810 days of ROI values, we've only included 60 days, 2 31-day lift tests. We now have essentially no values above 3 and essentially no values below 0.5. So we've gone from 0 to 4 to 0.5 to 3, right? So we've actually learned quite a lot. Why have we learned quite a lot? Well, we have time varying ROIs, which we think are very important because your channel performance can change over time. New competitors can come in, you can have raised your prices, you can have things like iOS 14, which dramatically change the advertising landscape, so on and so forth. So ROIs should be able to change over time, but they can't change in any way, shape, or form. They have to change smoothly with a seasonal pattern. What that means is that even outside of the lift tests, we're still going to be learning information, and that uncertainty is going to propagate as you go further away. And so even close to the lift tests, we're still similarly shaped to the lift tests, or in a similar range. As we get further away from the lift tests, the uncertainty gets widest. But we still learn something about the overall ROI of the channel. We've learned that it really can't be above 3 and it really can't be below 0.5. In the region around the lift test, we've actually learned quite a bit more than that. But there are limitations, like we really haven't learned anything with just the prior for the second channel, for example. The second channel is still just as uncertain as it was before. So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to run 2 models, but we're going to actually include the prediction errors in the model, right? So we're going to take off this prior only flag. What does that do? That shows the errors to the model, right? So now the model is going to be incentivized to actually make its predictions close to the actual outcomes. So we run that, and now what do we get? First, I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is the prior with the lift test on the predictions. It's going to render, and our outcome is going to be somewhere in there, right? This isn't a very accurate model, and for good reason. The model does not care about how accurate it is at this point. Now we are running a model where the model does care about how well it fits in sample, and we'll show the predictions. The predictions are very tight around the actual outcomes, exactly what you would hope for, but let's take a look at the ROIs. So this is this model's prediction of channel one's ROIs. They're pretty uncertain still. If you look at the range, we've collapsed the range quite a bit from 0.5 to 2.5, whereas before it had been 0 to 4, right? So this is our state of the world before we introduced any information to the model, and we've gotten closer. If you look at the axes here, this is ranging from above 4 down almost to 0, and now we're in a world where we're sort of 0.5 to 2. So we've learned a lot about the channel, but there's still quite a bit of uncertainty. And we can plot what we've learned about these other two channels. This is channel 2, and channel 3 has the most spend, so it gets the most signal in the model, right? So this is the most precise version of the model. And actually, let me just make sure. Nope. There we go. Yeah, so we have like almost 2x the spend in channel 3 relative to the other two. No mystery why we get the most signal on channel 3, but still quite some uncertainty here. Now, on the last day of the model, we're assuming that the ROI can be anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5, right? I think a lot of people might consider that to be a very wide range. Similarly, with channel 1, on the last day of the model, assuming you're at present day and you want to get an estimate of the ROI, you'd say it's between 0.5 and 2. The question is, how can we have this much uncertainty and still make predictions that are this accurate? Well, this is illustrating a number of things that are sort of bedeviling about MMMs. You can get very accurate or very tight predictions, even with uncertainty in the channels that make up the prediction, right? And the reason is that the uncertainties cancel out, right? If you're overestimating high on one channel, you're underestimating low on another. It's quite common to have very precise predictions, but with uncertainty at the individual channel level. What this means is that there are a lot of possible versions of reality that are all consistent with what you actually observe, and what you actually observe is what you spend and what you get. There are a lot of different ways to go from what you spend to what you get. There's a lot of uncertainty in the channel's performance, and you're seeing that here. Right. We've learned a lot by adding lift tests, and we've learned a lot by adding the prediction errors to the model. Let's see what happens when we add both. So this model, we're including the two lift tests. Just to recap, the lift tests are saying on channel 1 from time step 300 to 330, channel 1 time step 700 to 730, right? We've measured these means with these errors. I've lifted the prior only flags, showing the model the prediction error. What we're trying to do is come up with ROIs for the channel that are both compatible with the predictions, right, with actual observed data, but then are also compatible with the lift tests. That's what's happening in the model. Let me just show you, this is what the ROI curves looked like for the model that just saw the prediction error. Now, this is what the ROIs look like with the prediction error and the lift tests. And we've actually reduced the uncertainty in this channel quite a bit. We've gone from this to this. And especially in the regions where there are lift tests, we can see that the range of possible ROI trajectories has narrowed in much more tightly on hopefully the true value. I'm going to start on this plot that's being rendered at the moment and overlay the true ROI curve here, which will show up in red. You can see that our simulations are compatible with the ROI. Then I can plot grid points where the lift tests happen. You can probably see it visually even before the visual aids come up, right? It's right around here and right around here. You can see that this ROI trajectory is now compatible with the lift tests and with the observed outcome data. We can also see what happens with the other channel estimates. Without the lift tests, our ROI curves for channel 2 look like this, and with them, they look like that. There really isn't too much of a change. And with channel 3, we'll do the same. Channel 3, which had no specific lift tests included in the model also sees its range of plausible values collapse dramatically and gets it almost exactly right in the model with lift tests included, but recall, no lift tests on this channel. Even though there are no lift tests on this channel got the benefit of lift tests on another channel to get more precision. Now I want to put some actual numbers on the improvement. And in order to put some numbers on the improvement, I'm going to need to talk a little bit about how we calculate error for models like recasts, where you're producing not just a mean and a standard deviation, but a bunch of simulations or draws from the posterior. When recast estimates the ROI of a channel, this ROI array has 2,000 plausible values for each of the 3 channels for each of the 810 time steps. So if I just zoom in on channel 3 and the last time step, I get 2,000 values, and I can take the histogram of them. This is a histogram of the 2,000 values of the 810th time step for ROI3. So the last day ROI3, you're saying, hey, this is channel 3. What could the ROI be today on the last day of the model? And we could plot the actual ROI here if I do this right. Okay, so the question is, how accurate is this distribution at predicting this red value, which is about 2.55 or whatever that is? Let's actually figure out what it specifically is. 2.568. So the question is, how accurate is this histogram at predicting this red value? Now you might say, what is the average error? So I might take these ROIs, I might subtract that value, take the absolute and I might get 0.25. Okay, so the mean absolute error of every one of the simulations for the true value is 0.25. Okay, is that good or bad? Or is that the right way to think about it? Well, I would say it's not the right way to think about it for a couple of reasons. One is that you can do the mean absolute error, right? But there's some sense in which we care that the red line is in the middle of the distribution. And so just to illustrate why this sort of doesn't work is, let's say I have my actual is 0, just to keep things simple, and I have 4 predictions, 1, 1, 2, 2, right? Well, the mean absolute error is going to be 1.5. But I have another possibility, which is that my predictions are 1, -1, 2, 2, right? And the actuals are 0. And the mean error in that case is also going to be 1.5. Now, which of these sets of predictions is better? This set of predictions contains the true value. 0 is exactly in the middle of -1 and 1 and of -2 and 2. So 0 is right in the middle of the ensemble prediction for that 0 value. Whereas in this particular case, 0 is off to the left. It's not contained in the prediction distribution. And so what we want is an error metric that is going to reward us for getting the true value in the middle of the distribution and for making the distribution as narrow as possible. The error metric that is best at doing that, we think, is called the cumulative ranked probability score, which does exactly what I just said. It takes ensemble predictions and rewards those predictions for having the actual value being in the middle and from the distribution of predictions being as narrow as possible. There is a package called scoring rules that has this function CRPS sample, and we can see what this would be for this set of predictions. 1.25 is what it would come up with. But if I make it this case here, the error is going to be 0.625. It's going to be twice as good as it was here. Even though the average absolute error has stayed exactly the same, we're now rewarding us for being in the middle of it. One more wrinkle is that if I plot the spend across each of the channels, I have different spends. Some channels spend more at different lengths in time. Let's add some red, blue, green. Channel 1, we're spending a lot more in the later periods than we are in the earlier periods. And so we should care more about our ROI estimates in the later periods of channel 2. We're spending more in the earlier periods than we are in the later periods. So we should care more about the ROIs here than we do here, right? And so in order to assess the accuracy of the predictions, I'm going to take a weighted average by how much we spent. What I did to get the predictions was I got the impacts, which is the weighted average of the ROIs by the spend, right? It's literally just ROIs times spend. And so instead of calculating the accuracy of the ROIs directly, I'm going to calculate the accuracy of the impacts of the channels as estimated by the model. In this line here, I've got this ratio. Let me walk through what this ratio is. I'm going to just set I equals 1. So what this is saying is I'm taking this line and I've got the impacts for the first channel, I equals 1, and this is going to be a vector of length 810. And I've got this 2000 or 810 by 2000 matrix here, which is for each of the 810 impacts, I've got 2000 ensemble predictions. So this is just boom. And so what this is saying is I'm going to get the error, the 810 errors in the predictions for channel 1 in terms of their impacts. This is scaled on the units of impact. To reduce this to a single number, just take the mean. On average, the model with no lift tests had an error of about 15,000 when estimating the impact of the channel on a given day. I can do the same thing for the channel with lift tests included for channel 1. And visually see this is a lot lower. The channel with lift tests got a lot closer to the true impacts for channel 1 than it did relative to the model with no lift tests. And if I take the ratio, I can see, okay, the model with lift tests had 61% of the error that the model with no lift test had. And if I take 1 minus that, I can sort of call that the improvement, a 38.36 or 37% improvement in the precision of the model at estimating the impact of the channel. And I'm going to see that the improvements in the estimations were about, like I said, 38.4 for the first channel, not so much improvement for the second channel, but a 32% improvement for the third channel. And we never included any lift tests for the third channel. So the third channel, even though it wasn't pinned in any way by the model, was implicitly pinned because we have this uncertainty that kind of cancels out to get the prediction. But if you're reducing the uncertainty in one of the channels, that's going to have the effect of reducing the uncertainty in the other channels as well. And just the way the cookie crumbled in this particular case is that the uncertainties in channel 1 and channel 3 were correlated. Reduced one of the uncertainties, we reduced the other as well. And so the whole model got more efficient. This is for relatively few lift tests, right? This is only 2, right, across 810 time steps, which works out to 2 years and a quarter, covering 2 months for one channel. And we got a dramatic improvement in the efficiency of estimating the channel impacts. I'm going to wrap up here. This is illustrated in a sort of toy model, the value of doing a lot of things. The first is just doing parameter recovery. We've simulated data and seen how well the model can do at recovering these ROIs. Hopefully this has been a sobering experience. The model makes super accurate, it has super accurate in-sample fit, but still quite a bit of uncertainty into how it gets there, right? There are a lot of different versions of reality that can take you from inputs to outputs, and that results in uncertainty, right? And this is with a toy model. Recast's real model is going to include things like channel level saturation, time shift, spikes, channel interactions, context variables, you name it, right? So the actual true recast model is a lot more complicated than what you see here. This model is in sort of concept. A lot of the flavor of this is very similar to the Recast MMM that we use in production. I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a pretty technical chalk talk. If you enjoyed this content, stay tuned for more. Thank you very much.